Okay, let's unpack this.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty huge, the whole landscape of contemporary philosophy of language.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about grammar rules here. We want to get into the deep stuff, how language actually shapes how we think, maybe even structures reality itself, and, how communication even works.
Exactly, it's fundamental. And the sources we're drawing on, they paint this picture of a real intellectual journey, almost a battleground of ideas, moving from, say, the search for a pure objective logic underpinning everything.
To these really quite radical claims later on that maybe language isn't this fixed thing at all, but more like a social activity, totally dependent on context.
Right, so our mission today is to trace that journey, try and make sense of it, and really grapple with this core paradox that seems to sit right at the heart of it all.
And that paradox is a fantastic place to kick off, isn't it? Because it sets up the whole tension.
It really does. On one side, you've got this strong intuition, this philosophical conviction that for communication to work, there must be some kind of shared objective structure underneath it all.
Like Gottlob Frege, late 19th century, the logician.
That's the one. Frege argued for what he called a common treasury of thoughts, objective concepts, available to all humanity. For him, the sense of a word or a sentence, its conceptual content, isn't subjective. It's fixed, eternal out there.
Independent of my mind or your mind.
Precisely. It's the solid ground for knowledge, something we can all access. Quite a comforting thought, actually.
It is, that our understanding isn't just floating randomly, but then you follow the history and bam, late 20th century, you hit Donald Davidson.
And Davidson just throws a grenade into the whole thing. His famous claim, and it's worth quoting, "There's no such thing as a language, not if a language is anything like what many philosophers and linguists have supposed."
Wow. There is therefore no such thing to be learned, mastered, or born with.
Yeah. I mean, taken seriously, it's radical. It suggests there's no prepackaged system, no abstract code book that we both possess and refer to when we talk.
So how do we communicate then? If Frege sees us sharing thoughts, but Davidson says there's no shared language object to facilitate that, that's the puzzle.
That is the central challenge. How can shared understanding happen if the very foundation, the shared system, is potentially an illusion? This tension, this Frege-Davidson clash, really drives so much of the philosophical exploration in the last century or so.
Okay, so to see how we got from Frege's treasury to Davidson's, denial of language as an object, we absolutely have to start with Frege properly. He's seen as the real beginning of the contemporary phase. Why is that?
Right. It's not just his work on formal logic, which was revolutionary in itself, is that he fundamentally shifted the questions philosophers were asking.
How so?
Well, before Frege, think Descartes. The big questions were often epistemological. How can I know anything? How can I be certain? It starts with the individual mind.
The famous, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. Frege basically reverses the priority. He makes this decisive anti-Cartesian turn. He argues, look, we can't properly investigate knowledge, or the I think, until we have a clear grasp of the language we use to express thoughts and knowledge.
Ah, so semantics before epistemology.
Precisely. We need to understand the structure of meaning, the structure of propositions first. It's a move from the private realm of individual thought to the public, shared realm of language. From I think to we speak, you could say.
That's a huge shift, and this focus on language structure, it led to some core principles that seemed to underpin everything that followed, even for people who later disagreed with Frege.
Yes, there are about 3 foundational pillars you can identify. The first one is almost deceptively simple, the arbitrariness principle.
Meaning the sounds we use for words have no inherent connection to what they mean.
Exactly. Dog doesn't sound like a dog or intrinsically mean dog. It's purely convention, social agreement. Language is a system of arbitrary signs. Seems obvious now, maybe, but important to state clearly.
Okay, what's the second?
The second is absolutely crucial and much more distinctively Fregean, the context principle.
Right. This is the idea that words only have meaning within a sentence.
Yes. You can't analyze the meaning of dog in isolation as if it's just a label you can stick on things independently. Its semantic contribution only really makes sense or can only be properly analyzed when it's part of a complete proposition, a complete thought being expressed.
Like the dog barked.
Exactly. The sentence, the proposition, becomes the primary unit of meaning, not the individual word. This was revolutionary because it moved analysis away from just dictionary definitions towards logical structure and how components fit together to express something potentially true or false.
Which leads nicely into the third pillar.
The principle of compositionality. This is what makes language so powerful and flexible. We have a limited vocabulary, right? And a limited set of grammatical rules.
But we can create and understand a virtually infinite number of new sentences we've never heard before.
Precisely. And compositionality is the explanation. The meaning of a whole sentence is built up systematically from the meanings of its parts and the way they're put together, the syntax. It's like a calculation. If you know what dog means and barked means and how subject-verb structure works, you can compute the meaning of the dog barked.
Okay, so these three, arbitrariness, context, compositionality, they set the stage. But you said this led to a split.
Immediately, yes. These principles became the common ground, but philosophers took them in very different directions. You see the emergence of two major traditions in 20th century language philosophy.
What are they?
On one side, you have the philosophy of ideal language. This is the tradition that flows directly from Frege to people like Bertrand Russell and the early Wittgenstein.
Their goal was?
They saw natural language every day, English, German, whatever, as messy, ambiguous, logically flawed. Their project was to use the tools of formal logic, this precise new system Frege helped create, to either construct a logically perfect language or at least to clarify natural language by revealing its underlying hidden logical form.
And for them, meaning was primarily about truth.
Yes. The core concept is truth conditions. The meaning of a sentence is whatever determines whether that sentence is true or false. Logic gives you the conditions for truth.
Okay, that's one path. What's the other?
The other path is the philosophy of common language. Think of the later Wittgenstein, J.L. Austin, H.P. Grice. They looked at the ideal language project and said, wait a minute.
What was their objection?
They argued that by focusing only on logic, truth, and reference, the ideal language guys were ignoring vast, crucial aspects of how language actually works in real life. They threw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
So less about logical form, more about
use, function, context, what people are doing with words. This leads to the focus on pragmatics, not just what a sentence means in the abstract, but what a speaker means by uttering it in a particular situation, the actions they perform, the effects they intend.
So truth conditions versus use and action, that's the fundamental split.
That's the great divergence, yes. And it sets the stage for almost all the major debates that follow.
Right. Let's delve deeper into that ideal language tradition first. Frege's distinction between sense and reference feels absolutely central. You mentioned it arose from a puzzle about identity.
Yes, Frege's puzzle. It's a classic illustration of why reference, what a term points to, can't be the whole story of meaning. Take a simple identity statement like, the morning star is the morning star.
Okay, that's obviously true. A. Not very informative.
Exactly. It has low cognitive value, tells you nothing new.
Yeah.
Now, astronomers discovered that the object we call the morning star, the bright object visible in the morning, is the very same object as the evening star, the bright object visible in the evening. Both are the planet Venus.
Great.
So if meaning were just reference to just the object pointed to the morning star, and the evening star should mean the same things, they refer to the same thing, Venus.
Okay.
But if you substitute one term for the other in our identity statement, you get the morning star is the evening star.
And that is informative. That represents a real discovery. It has high cognitive value.
Precisely. So Frege asks, how can these two identity statements, AA and AB, have such different cognitive values if A and B both refer to the identical object? His answer is that terms must have more than just a reference. They also have a sense, or Sinn in German.
And the sense.
The mode of presentation of the reference. It's the way the object is conceived or described. The morning star presents Venus via its morning appearance. The evening star presents Venus via its evening appearance. These are different ways of thinking about or different conceptual routes to the same object.
So the sense captures the how we think about it part.
Exactly. And crucially for Frege, the sense is objective. It's not just a subjective mental image in my head, my Vorstellung. It's a shared public thought, or Gedanke. When we both understand the morning star is the evening star, we grasp the same objective thought, even if our private mental pictures of Venus differ.
So these objective thoughts make up his common treasury.
That's the idea. This realm of objective senses or thoughts exists independently of individual minds, providing the basis for shared knowledge and communication. And for complete sentences, Frege made a further move. The reference of a declarative sentence is its truth value, either true or false.
The sentence points to true or false.
Yes, and the sense of the sentence is the complete thought it expresses. This is a radical Platonism, really these abstract thoughts and truth values existing timelessly.
Okay, so that's Frege. Then comes Bertrand Russell, who takes this logical analysis even further.
He does. Russell was deeply influenced by Frege, but he pushed the idea of logical analysis as revealing the true structure of reality itself. This is logical atomism.
Meaning?
Russell believed that if you logically analyze language down to its simplest components, you reveal the fundamental building blocks of the world, simple objects, or ontological atoms, and the simple combinations they form, atomic facts. Language, when properly analyzed, mirrors the structure of reality.
And he connected this directly to how we know things?
Absolutely. Epistemology was key for Russell. He drew a vital distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description.
Acquaintance being direct awareness.
Yes, direct, unmediated, infallible contact with something. Russell thought we only have acquaintance with a very limited range of things. Our own current sense data, like the visual sensation of redness right now, maybe universals, possibly the self. It's immediate experience.
And knowledge by description is everything else.
Too much. It's indirect knowledge mediated through descriptive phrases. You know that the Battle of Hastings happened in 1066, but you weren't there. You know it via descriptions.
How does this impact language, specifically names?
This distinction leads Russell to a shocking conclusion. Most ordinary proper names, like Aristotle or London or Socrates, are not logically proper names.
Why not? They seem to name specific things.
Because, Russell argues, we don't have acquaintance with Aristotle or London. These are complex historical figures or physical objects. We only know them by description. Therefore, names like Aristotle are really disguised, abbreviated definite descriptions. Aristotle might stand for something like the student of Plato and teacher of Alexander the Great.
So only things we're directly acquainted with can have logically proper names, like this referring to sense datum.
Essentially, yes. This radical view leads directly into his most famous contribution, the theory of definite descriptions, from his 1905 paper on denoting.
What problem was he trying to solve there? It had to do with things that don't exist.
Exactly. Consider a phrase like the present king of France. In 1905, there was no king of France. So if this phrase is a referring term, what does it refer to? A non-existent king.
Right.
Russell found that ontologically problematic. We don't want our world cluttered with non-entities.
So what was his solution?
It was brilliant. He argued that definite descriptions like the present king of France aren't actually names or referring terms at all. When you analyze them logically, they disappear.
How?
A sentence like, the present king of France is bald, isn't attributing baldness to some specific, non-existent individual. Instead, Russell analyzes it as a conjunction of three quantified statements.
Okay.
1. There exists at least one person who is currently king of France. Existence claim.
2. There exists at most one person who is currently king of France. Uniqueness claim.
And 3. Whoever is currently king of France is bald. Property attribution.
I see. And because the first part, the existence claim, is false.
Yeah, the entire conjunction is false. So the sentence, the present king of France is bald, comes out false, which seems right, but crucially, it achieves this without ever having to refer to a non-existent king. The referring phrase dissolves into logical quantifiers.
That's very clever. It cleans up the logic in the ontology. It really shows that ideal language goal of revealing a deeper, clearer structure beneath the surface grammar.
Absolutely. It's a prime example of using logical analysis to solve philosophical puzzles generated by the ambiguities of natural language.
Now, the figure who embodies both the peak and the eventual rejection of this ideal language project is Ludwig Wittgenstein, starting with his early work, the Tractatus.
Yes, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. It's an incredibly dense, aphoristic work, but it presents the most rigorous, maybe austere version of the idea that language mirrors reality. This is often called the model theory or picture theory.
Language as a picture of facts.
Essentially, yes. A proposition, a meaningful sentence, functions like a logical picture or model build of a possible state of affairs. For the picture to represent reality, it must share the same logical form as the reality it depicts. Think of how a map represents a territory by sharing spatial relationships.
So the structure is key. How did Wittgenstein see logic itself compared to Russell? Russell thought logic described the most general features of reality.
Wittgenstein's view was different, and maybe even deeper. He saw logic as transcendental. It's not part of the world. It sets the limits of the world, the limits of thought, the limits of what can be meaningfully said.
What does that mean for logical truths, like tautologies, A or not A?
For Wittgenstein and the Tractatus, logical propositions are tautologies. They are true in all possible circumstances. But because they don't rule anything out, they don't actually picture any specific fact about the world. He called them sinless, senseless.
Senseless, that sounds dismissive.
It's not meant negatively. It means they lack sin in the Freudian sense of representing a state of affairs. They don't say anything about how the world is. Instead, they show the logical scaffolding, the framework within which we can say things about the world. They reveal the structure, but contain no information content themselves.
Okay, so logic provides the framework but doesn't describe the furniture within it.
That's a good way to put it. And this leads to his famous, somewhat mystical conclusion about philosophy. Philosophy isn't a body of doctrine. It doesn't discover truths. Its role is sprachkritik, critique of language.
What does that involve?
It's an activity of clarification. The philosopher's job is to dissolve philosophical problems by showing that they often arise from trying to use language to talk about things that can't be said, trying to talk about the logical framework itself, or ethics, or the meaning of life, which lie beyond the limits of factual description. Philosophy clarifies thought by revealing the limits of language.
Okay, so that's the early Wittgenstein. Language as a single logical picture, philosophy as clarification, but then he completely changes his mind.
Dramatically. Decades later, in his posthumously published philosophical investigations, he repudiates the core ideas of the Tractatus. He calls his earlier view Platonic and dogmatic because it searched for the single essence of language, the logical form.
And what did he replace it with?
He replaces the idea of a single essence with radical pluralism. Language doesn't have one function, like picturing. It has countless functions. His new core idea is famously summarized as, the meaning of a word is its use in the language.
Meaning as use, that sounds very different.
It is. He uses the analogy of a toolbox. A toolbox contains many different tools. A hammer, a screwdriver, a ruler, glue. They all have different functions. Language is like that. Words and sentences are tools we use for different purposes. Describing, yes, but also commanding, questioning, greeting, joking, telling stories, praying.
So understanding meaning is understanding how these tools are used in practice.
Exactly. And these uses aren't random. They are part of structured activities he called language games. These are simplified models of language use. Think of builders calling out for specific types of stone, or children learning color words by pointing. They are rule-governed activities.
And these games are embedded in something larger.
Yes, they are embedded within, and only make sense within, broader patterns of human activity, culture, and shared practices, which he called forms of life. Our language games are interwoven with how we live. Understanding language isn't about grasping abstract meanings. It's about participating in these shared forms of life.
This focus on use and shared practice seems to lead to a major challenge regarding rules themselves, the rule-following paradox.
Ah, yes. This is one of the most debated and profound parts of the investigations, particularly as explored by Saul Kripke. It strikes the very heart of what it means to understand or mean something.
Okay, let's try to get our heads around it. How does the paradox work?
Take a simple rule, like addition plus. You've calculated sums many times. Let's say the largest numbers you've ever actually added are, say, 57.
Yeah.
Now I ask you, what is 68 plus 57?
125.
Right, but how do you know that the rule you're following now for this new calculation is plus and not some other rule? Let's call it quess. Quess is defined like this. It gives the same result as plus for all calculations involving numbers less than or equal to 57, but for any calculation involving a number greater than 57, the answer is always 5.
Okay, that's a weird rule, but I see the setup. All my past behavior is consistent with both plus and quess.
Exactly. So Kripke asks on Wittgenstein's behalf, what fact about you, right now in your mind, your brain state, and your past intentions, determines that you mean plus rather than cress?
I feel like I just know I mean plus. Maybe there's a mental image or an instruction I gave myself.
But Wittgenstein argues any mental image, any instruction, any formula you might have in your head is just another sign, and any sign can be interpreted in multiple ways. How do you know how to interpret that sign? You'd need another rule for interpreting the interpretation, leading to an infinite regress.
So no private mental fact, no snapshot of my mind right now can definitively fix the meaning of plus for all future cases.
That's the paradox. It seems like meaning becomes ungrounded, impossible. If no fact about me now determines the rule, what does?
What's Wittgenstein's answer then? Or Kripke's interpretation of it?
The solution, or perhaps the dissolution of the problem, is radically externalist and communitarian. Meaning isn't grounded in a private mental state, but in shared public practice. The fact that determines you mean plus isn't inside you. It's in the ongoing agreement of your linguistic community.
So, I mean, plus, because my community accepts 125 as the correct answer and would correct me if I said 5, my actions align with the communal activity.
Precisely. Following a rule is a practice, not an interpretation. Meaning is normative, sustained by public checks and agreement. It fundamentally relies on being part of a community, a shared form of life. This completely undermines the idea of meaning as a private, internal state, and certainly challenges Frege's objective mind independent thoughts.
Wow, okay, that rule-following discussion really highlights the shift towards practice and community. And this seems to pave the way perfectly for the next big movement in the common language tradition, the pragmatic revolution.
Absolutely. If meaning is use, then we need theories that focus on how we use language.
Yeah.
And the pioneers here were J.L. Austin and later his student John Searle developing speech act theory.
Austin was the one who challenged the idea that sentences are only interesting if they're true or false, right?
Yes. Philosophers, especially the logical positivists influenced by the ideal language tradition, had this tendency, Austin called it the descriptive fallacy, to assume that the main business of language is describing the world, making statements that can be evaluated as true or false.
But Austin pointed out lots of sentences don't do that.
Exactly. He initially focused on what he called performative utterances. These are utterances where, in saying the words under the right circumstances, you are actually performing an action.
Like saying, I promise.
Precisely. Saying, I promise to pay you back, is the act of promising. Or a judge saying, I sentence you to 10 years, is the act of sentencing. Or saying, I name this ship the Queen Elizabeth, while smashing the champagne bottle is the act of naming. You're doing something with words, not just describing something.
Okay, so that's performatives. But he broadened this idea.
He did. He came to realize that all utterances involve performing actions. He developed a framework analyzing any speech act into 3 simultaneous acts.
3 acts in one utterance. What are they?
First, there's the locutionary act. This is just the basic act of uttering sounds that conform to the grammar and vocabulary of a language, simply saying the words, the cat is on the mat.
Okay, the physical act of saying it.
Second, and this is the really crucial one for communication, is the illocutionary act. This is the act performed in saying something. It's the conventional force of the utterance. So, in saying the cat is on the mat, I might be performing the illocutionary act of stating a fact or asserting something.
But couldn't it be something else? Like a warning if the mat is electrified?
Exactly. Or a request, if I want you to remove the cat. The same locutionary act can carry different illocutionary forces depending on context and intention. Identifying the illocutionary act, understanding whether it's an assertion, a question, a command, a promise, a warning, is key to understanding the communication.
Okay, locutionary, illocutionary, what's the third?
The perlocutionary act. This is the effect the utterance has on the hearer by means of the utterance. It's the consequence achieved by saying something.
So if I state the cat is on the mat, illocutionary act of asserting, the perlocutionary effect might be convincing you that the cat is indeed on the mat.
Yes. Or if I command, get off the mat, illocutionary act of commanding, the perlocutionary act might be persuading you or causing you to get off the mat. The perlocutionary effect is about the actual outcome or impact on the listener's thoughts or actions.
Okay, this framework seems really useful for analyzing real conversations. How did Searle build on this?
Searle systematized Austin's ideas further. He argued that the illocutionary act is the minimal, fundamental unit of linguistic communication. And very importantly, he argued that understanding illocutionary acts requires understanding the speaker's mental states, particularly belief and intention.
So to know if I'll be there is a promise, I need to infer the speaker's intention to commit themselves.
Exactly. Searle's analysis brings mental states right back into the picture. For him, philosophy of language becomes intrinsically linked to, perhaps even a branch of, the philosophy of mind. You can't analyze linguistic acts without analyzing the intentions and beliefs behind them.
This focus on intention sounds very similar to the work of H.P. Grice.
Yes, Grice's work is complementary and hugely influential. He also wanted to ground meaning in the speaker's intentions. He made a famous distinction between natural meaning, like smoke meaning fire, and non-natural meaning, or meaning
being linguistic meaning.
Yes. Grice proposed that for an utterance to have meaning, the speaker must intend to produce a certain effect or belief in the hearer, and intend for the hearer to recognize that intention, and intend for that recognition to be part of the reason for the effect. It's a complex, nested structure of intentions.
Wow, that's quite intricate. But it leads to his really famous idea about conversation.
It does. His theory of conversational implicature. Grice observed that in conversation, we usually operate under what he called the cooperative principle. We try to make our contribution helpful and appropriate to the ongoing exchange.
And he broke this down into specific rules or maxims?
Yes, 4 maxims. Quantity, be informative but not overly so. Quality, be truthful, don't say what you lack evidence for. Relation, be relevant. And mode, be clear, brief, and orderly.
But people violate these maxims all the time.
Exactly. And that's where implicature comes in. When a speaker blatantly flouts or violates a maxim in a way that the hearer can recognize, the hearer assumes the speaker is still being cooperative at a deeper level and infers an additional unstated meaning, the implicature.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Suppose you ask me, is John a good philosopher? And I reply, well, he has excellent handwriting.
Okay, that's clearly violating the maxim of relation. It's irrelevant to his philosophical skill.
Right. Because the violation is so obvious, you assume I'm still trying to communicate something relevant. You infer or generate the implicature that I perhaps think John is not a good philosopher, but I'm too polite or cautious to say so directly. I'm implying it.
So implicature explains things like irony, sarcasm, hints, indirectness.
Precisely. And it does so without having to say the literal meaning of the sentence, he has excellent handwriting changes. The literal meaning stays the same, but the context and the assumed cooperation allow us to convey and understand much more. It shows how much communication relies on pragmatic reasoning beyond the literal code.
This focus on intention, context, and use seems to blur the lines quite a bit. Where does the literal meaning end and the contextual meaning begin?
You've hit on one of the fiercest ongoing debates in contemporary philosophy of language, the contextualism debate. It's exactly about that boundary between semantics, literal meaning, and pragmatics, meaning in use.
What are the main positions?
Broadly, you have contextualists on one side. Thinkers like Francois Recanati argue that context plays a role not just in figuring out implicatures, but in determining the actual literal content of what is said, the proposition expressed, the truth conditions themselves.
So even for a simple sentence like, it's raining, you need context to know where and when it's supposedly raining for it to have a definite true-false value.
Exactly. Or, I've had breakfast. To know if that's true, you need context to determine which day the speaker is referring to. Contextualists argue that this kind of context sensitivity goes very deep, making the speech act, the utterance in context, the primary bearer of truth-conditional content, not the abstract sentence type.
And the other side, the anti-contextualists.
They're sometimes called literalists or minimalists. They want to defend a more traditional view where there is a stable, minimal semantic content for a sentence that can be determined largely independent of the specific context of utterance. They worry that if context infects what is said too much,
then meaning becomes unstable, maybe relative to speaker intentions or specific situations.
That's the fear. They argue we need a solid baseline of literal meaning to ground communication and truth. They try to limit the role of pragmatics primarily to figuring out implicatures or resolving obvious ambiguities, keeping the core semantic content relatively context-free. It's a very active and complex debate about the fundamental nature of linguistic content.
Okay, let's shift gears back towards the more logic-inspired tradition, but now filtered through a very different lens, a kind of scientific naturalism and skepticism about traditional philosophical concepts. This brings us to W.V.O. Quine and then Donald Davidson.
Right. Quine represents a major turning point. He was deeply influenced by the logical empiricists, but ultimately dismantled some of their core assumptions in his hugely influential 1951 paper, Two Dogmas of Empiricism.
What were the 2 dogmas he attacked?
The first was the sharp distinction between analytic truths, true purely by definition or logic, like all bachelors are unmarried, and synthetic truths, true based on empirical facts about the world, like my cat is black.
That seems like a pretty fundamental distinction in philosophy. Why did he reject it?
Quine argued that there's ultimately no clear, non-circular way to define analytic. Concepts like meaning, synonymy, definition all rely on each other. He suggested the distinction is blurry at best, maybe non-existent. There isn't a sharp line between truths of language and truths of fact.
Okay, that's dogma 1. What was the second?
The second dogma was reductionism, the idea that every meaningful statement could, in principle, be translated into a statement purely about immediate sense experience. Like the meaning of there's a table here could be reduced to a complex set of potential sensory inputs.
And Quine rejected this too.
Completely. He advocated for holism. Our beliefs don't face the tribunal of experience one by one. Instead, our knowledge forms a vast, interconnected web of beliefs.
A web? How does that work?
Think of logic and mathematics at the center, core scientific laws further out, and specific factual beliefs near the periphery. Experience impacts the edges of the web. If an experience conflicts with a belief at the edge, we have choices. We might discard that belief, or we might adjust beliefs further inside the web, even logical ones, to maintain overall coherence. The system is tested as a whole, not sentence by sentence.
So no single sentence is immune to revision, not even logical ones in principle.
In principle, yes, though we're very reluctant to revise the core. This holistic view leads him to his program of epistemology naturalized. Philosophy isn't a special a priori discipline sitting above science. It's continuous with science. Figuring out how we know things is ultimately a scientific question, part of psychology and physics.
Okay, this web of belief and naturalism, how does it connect to language specifically? This leads to his ideas about translation.
Directly. It leads to his famous thought experiment about radical translation and the thesis of the indeterminacy of translation.
This is the Gavagai example.
That's the classic one. Imagine a linguist trying to translate a completely unknown language with no prior clues. They observe the native speaker's behavior. A rabbit runs past. The native speaker points and says, Gavagai.
So does Gavagai mean rabbit?
That seems like the obvious hypothesis. But Quine argues, how can the linguist be sure? The native's utterance, Gavagai, is prompted by the stimulus of the rabbit appearing. The linguist can test this by pointing to rabbits and seeing if the native assents, yes, Gavagai, or dissents, no Gavagai. This gives the stimulus meaning of the term, the pattern of sensory stimulations that prompt assent or dissent.
Okay.
But, Quine argues, the same pattern of stimulus meaning, the same observable behavior of assenting to rabbit sightings, is also consistent with translating Gavagai as undetached rabbit part, or temporal stage of a rabbit, or rabbithood manifesting itself.
So multiple translation manuals could fit all the behavioral evidence perfectly.
Exactly. You could write one manual that translates Gavagai as rabbit, and maps the native grammar onto ours in one way, and another manual that translates Gavagai as undetached rabbit part and adjusts the grammar differently, and both manuals would be perfectly compatible with every possible observation of the native's verbal behavior.
What's the philosophical punchline then?
The punchline is radical. If all possible behavioral evidence can't decide between these incompatible translation manuals, then there is simply no fact of the matter about which translation is correct. There is no determinate meaning in the native's head that the linguist is failing to capture. Meaning itself is indeterminate, underdetermined by behavior.
So forget Frige's objective sense. Meaning is just a pattern of behavior, and even that doesn't fix a unique interpretation.
That's Quine's view. It's a thoroughgoing behaviorism applied to meaning. And this ties into his view on ontology, what exists. For Quine, ontology is relative to our language, specifically our best scientific language. To be is to be the value of a variable. We are committed to the existence of whatever entities, electrons, sets, numbers, our best scientific theories need to quantify over to be true. There's no deeper reality accessible outside of our scientific framework.
Wow. Okay, so Quine clears the ground with behaviorism and indeterminacy. How does Davidson build on or react to this? He was Quine's student, right?
Yes, deeply influenced, but he departs in significant ways, particularly regarding the role of mental states. Davidson accepts the radical interpretation scenario, starting from scratch to understand a speaker, but he thinks pure behaviorism isn't enough. He reintroduces concepts like belief and desire, but in a very specific, non-traditional way. This leads to his complex view called anomalous monism.
Anomalous monism, let's break that down. Monism meaning?
Monism, meaning there's ultimately only one kind of stuff in the world, physical stuff. Every event, including every mental event, like having a thought or a desire, is identical to some physical event, like a brain state. So ontologically, it's physicalism.
Okay, so the mind is physical. What does the anomalous part mean?
Anomalous means not falling under strict laws. Davidson argues that while every mental event is a physical event, the mental vocabulary we use to describe thoughts, beliefs, desires, intentions doesn't map onto the physical vocabulary in a law-like way. There are no strict, exceptionless psychophysical laws.
So you can't have a law like whenever someone is in brain state X, they believe that P.
Exactly. You might find correlations, but Davidson argues there won't be strict deterministic laws connecting specific physical states to specific propositional attitudes, like believing P or desiring Q. The mental realm is anomalous with respect to physical laws.
Why is that important?
It's crucial for preserving the autonomy of rational explanation. We explain people's actions by citing their reasons, their beliefs and desires. For Davidson, reasons can be causes of actions, contra some Wittgensteinians. An action is an event rationalized by a primary reason, a belief-desire pair. But this rational explanation operates under norms of coherence and rationality that are different from the causal laws of physics. If there were strict psychophysical laws, the mental might just collapse into the physical, potentially threatening our concepts of rationality and freedom. Anomalous monism tries to have it both ways. Physicalism about ontology, but non-reducibility of rational explanation. Okay, that's a subtle position. How does this intricate view of mind feed back into the problem of interpreting language, the radical interpretation scenario?
It feeds back directly. The interpreter, faced with the speaker's utterances and behavior, has to figure out both what the speaker's words mean and what the speaker believes and desires. These are interdependent. You can't decode meaning without knowing beliefs, and you can't figure out beliefs without knowing meanings. The Circle Quine pointed out, how does Davidson break it? Not just with behavior.
He breaks it using the principle of charity. This isn't about being nice. It's a methodological necessity for interpretation to even get started. The interpreter must assume, as a working hypothesis, that the speaker is largely rational and holds mostly true beliefs, especially about their immediate environment.
Why assume they're mostly right and rational? What if they're confused or lying?
You have to start somewhere. If you assume the speaker is massively irrational or holds overwhelmingly false beliefs, you lose any foothold for interpreting their words. Widespread, inexplicable error or irrationality would make interpretation impossible. Charity maximizes agreement between interpreter and speaker, providing a baseline. You assume shared rationality and mostly shared truths about the world, and then you can start correlating utterances with conditions and attributing specific beliefs and meanings that make sense of their overall behavior.
So interpretation requires assuming rationality and truth as a default.
Yes. Davidson argues that the very concepts of belief, desire, meaning, and interpretation are holistically linked and only make sense against a background assumption of general coherence and correspondence with the world. This allows him to solve for meaning and belief simultaneously, moving beyond Quine's stricter behaviorism by invoking this normative principle of charity. It's a profound attempt to naturalize meaning while preserving rationality.
We've covered so much ground, from logical precision to social use to radical interpretation. To really see how these different approaches handle the fuzzier edges of language, looking at metaphor seems like a perfect test case.
It really is. Metaphor challenges theories head-on. Is it just decoration? Does it convey special meaning? Is it fundamentally conceptual? How does it even work? Your theory of language has to have something to say about metaphor.
What's the historical perspective? Aristotle, for instance.
Aristotle, in his Poetics and Rhetoric, gave one of the earliest analyses. He defined metaphor as giving a thing a name that belongs to something else, a transport of a name, based on some kind of analogy or similarity.
So just a fancy way of talking, ornamentation.
Not entirely. While he saw it as a feature of poetic language, Aristotle also recognized its cognitive power. He thought good metaphors could teach by genus, revealing genuine similarities and providing insight. It wasn't just decoration, it could lead to understanding.
Okay. How has that idea evolved? Modern cognitive science seems very interested in metaphor.
Hugely interested, particularly the work of George Lakoff and Mark Johnson in cognitive linguistics. Their central claim is revolutionary. Metaphor isn't primarily a linguistic phenomenon, it's conceptual.
Meaning it's about how we think, not just how we talk.
Exactly. They argue that we understand abstract concepts largely by metaphorically structuring them in terms of more concrete concepts, often derived from bodily experience.
Can you give an example?
Their classic example is argument is war. We don't just talk about arguments using war vocabulary, attacking weak points, defending a position, winning or losing. We actually conceptualize the structure and dynamics of argumentation using the framework of warfare.
So the metaphor structures the thought itself.
Yes. Or consider love as a journey. Look how far we've come. We're at a crossroads. The relationship hit a dead end. They argue these aren't just convenient ways of speaking. They reflect an underlying conceptual mapping between the source domain, journeys, and the target domain, love.
Where do these source domains come from?
Lakoff and Johnson argue many originate in image schemas, basic structures derived from our embodied experience like container in-out, path, source path goal, balance, up-down spatial orientations. We project these embodied schemas on the abstract domains to make sense of them.
What are the implications of this view?
It's profound. It suggests that abstract thought is not purely logical or disembodied, but is grounded in our physical interactions with the world. It argues for the incorporation of the mind. And it suggests language processing isn't neatly modular. Understanding metaphor involves activating knowledge across different conceptual domains. Metaphor becomes central to cognition, not peripheral.
Okay, that's the cognitive linguistics view. How does this play out in the more analytic philosophy debates we've been tracing, particularly between someone like Searle and someone like Davidson?
Ah, yes, the Searle versus Davidson debate on metaphor is a classic clash, perfectly illustrating their different approaches.
Let's start with Searle. Given his focus on speech acts and intention, how does he handle metaphor?
For Searle, metaphor is a genuine form of linguistic communication. When someone speaks metaphorically, they have a specific speaker's meaning, the metaphorical meaning, that is different from the literal sentence meaning.
Okay, so there is a distinct metaphorical meaning being conveyed intentionally.
Yes, and the listener's job is to figure out that intended metaphorical meaning. Searle suggests the listener does this by recognizing that the literal meaning is somehow defective or inappropriate in context, like saying Sally is a block of ice literally doesn't make sense. This triggers the search for an alternative meaning.
How does the listener find it? Are there rules?
Searle thinks so. He suggests listeners employ certain cognitive strategies or principles of interpretation. They look for salient connections or similarities between the thing literally talked about, a block of ice, and the subject, Sally, based on shared background knowledge, to arrive at the intended metaphorical meaning. For instance, Sally is emotionally cold. So, for Searle, metaphorical understanding involves rule-governed inference from literal meaning plus context to speaker's intended metaphorical meaning.
Okay, that seems intuitive. What's Davidson's counterargument? Given his views, I suspect it's quite different.
Radically different. In his famous essay, What Metaphors Mean, Davidson denies the very existence of metaphorical meaning.
Wait, metaphors don't have metaphorical meanings. How can that be?
Davidson insists that words in a metaphor mean exactly what they literally mean and nothing else. When Juliet says Romeo is the sun, the word sun just means the sun. There's no second special metaphorical meaning attached to it.
But that sounds completely wrong. She doesn't literally mean Romeo is a giant ball of burning gas. We clearly understand something non-literal.
Davidson agrees we understand something, or rather, that something happens when we encounter a metaphor. But he argues this effect is purely causal, not semantic.
Causal, like one billiard ball hitting another.
Sort of. He compares the effect of a metaphor to a bump on the head, or a joke, or maybe seeing a picture. The literal meaning of the often surprising or category-crossing words acts as a stimulus. This stimulus causes us to notice things, to see resemblances, to have insights.
So the metaphor makes us see Romeo as the sun, highlighting his importance, warmth, centrality in her life.
Exactly. It prompts a cognitive or psychological effect. It makes us attend to certain aspects of Romeo and the sun and notice connections. But this insight, this noticing, is not a meaning conveyed by the words. It's an effect produced by the literal meaning used in a certain way.
So for Davidson, there's no special linguistic mechanism for metaphor. No rules to get from literal to metaphorical meaning.
None whatsoever. If a metaphor works, it's because the literal utterance successfully causes the intended psychological effect. If it fails, it's not because you failed to decode a meaning, but because the stimulus didn't produce the insight. It radically separates the semantics, literal meaning only, from the psychological effects. #tag outro.
Okay, reflecting on this whole journey, it's really quite something. We started with Frege searching for this bedrock, objective, logical thoughts, and Russell trying to map language directly onto atomic facts. This ideal of clarity and certainty.
Yeah, a kind of logical paradise almost. But then that framework starts to fracture. First, with the later Wittgenstein's realization that language is less like a single map and more like a messy toolbox full of different tools used for different jobs and shared social practices.
Right, bringing in the whole dimension of use and action, which leads to Austin and Grice focusing on speech acts, intentions, context, the whole pragmatic side of things, how we do things with words.
And then, pushing skepticism even further, you get Quine, who seems to dissolve meaning into just patterns of behavior, arguing it's fundamentally indeterminate.
Culminating in Davidson's really quite startling claim that maybe language as a fixed shared system, this abstract object we learn or possess, is actually a kind of philosophical illusion. Interpretation happens, communication happens, but maybe not via a shared codebook.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that core tension. If Davidson is even partly right, if there isn't this stable, abstract language out there to be mastered, How do we square that with Frege's compelling intuition, the feeling that we do share thoughts, that we inherit knowledge, that there is this common treasury?
How can communication be so reliable? How can science build on itself if the very medium is potentially so fluid, so dependent on interpretation and charity rather than fixed rules?
It really forces you to reconsider what holds communication together. If it's not a static rule book, maybe it's something more dynamic, more reliant on ongoing cooperation and adjustment. It almost takes us back to that rule-following paradox again, doesn't it?
It does. That question of what grounds our certainty.
If even our agreement on something as basic as 68 plus 57 is 125 isn't ultimately guaranteed by some fixed fact inside our heads, but rests on our continuing shared practice, our communal agreement to keep counting this way rather than some Kuse's way,
Then what is the foundation of our shared world? Is it timeless logic, as Frege might have hoped? Or is it something more like persistent, evolving social custom?
does our understanding rest on the bedrock of logical necessity or on the constantly negotiated agreements of our form of life? That's perhaps something to ponder as you engage in your own acts of communication and interpretation.